Thank you for listening to A Glimpse of the Kingdom. I'm Dr. David Pendergrass. In this podcast, I want to play for you a recording of a discipleship lesson I gave for the people at First Methodist Church, Houston. I hope you enjoy. Today, we're going to look at something that's really solemn and serious and sad, and that is the final hours of the life of Jesus. If you have your New Testament, please turn to Mark chapter 14. In Mark 14, we're going to start at the very end of the chapter, Mark 14, verse 53. We're going to skip over a few important things. It's all important, but the prayer in Gethsemane and his betrayal and so forth. He is finally, of course, arrested because Judas leads the Jerusalem police, as it were, to Jesus, and they arrest him and take him they form this ad hoc, or for one particular purpose, a meeting. And that meeting is a bunch of religious leadership. In verse 53, it says this: They led Jesus to the high priest, and all the chief priests and the elders and the scribes were assembled. And Peter had followed him at a distance right into the courtyard of the high priest. The courtyard of the high priest lets us know that this is not a formal, legal, or technical convening of the Sanhedrin, the highest Jewish government of the time. Instead, it's at the courtyard of the high priest, of Caiaphas. So they go to his house, and they form outside the courtyard and go inside, and he would have had a massive house. We know this because archaeological digs have discovered many of such houses in the time of the first century, and they were elaborate. We would call them mansions, huge mansions. They lived well. They go to have this meeting, and at the meeting, they all, says verse 55, the whole council sought to have testimony against Jesus to put him to death, but they found none. So we can tell here that this is not, again, a formal, dispassionate kind of hearing. In fact, they're trying to get Jesus killed. They're trying to do it. And people throw out, verse 56, many bore false witness against him, and they were, he did this, he did this, he did this, and they couldn't agree. We have to have two more to agree to get capital punishment. Well, none agreed, and Jesus just stayed quiet. In verse 61, it says, But he was silent and made no answer. Again, the high priest asked him, probably in desperation, Are you the Messiah, the Son of the Blessed? Of course, blessed means God the Father. Are you the Messiah, the Son of God, as it were, the Son of the Blessed? And Jesus said, I am. And you will see the Son of Man seated at the right hand of power and coming with the clouds of heaven. And the high priest tore his garments and said, Why do we still need witnesses? You've heard his blasphemy. Let me say a few words about that. One is, it's important to understand that there's no reason to think that any first century Jew would have heard the belief that someone thinks they're the Messiah is either illegal or immoral or breaking some law in Judaism. Many people before, during, and after Jesus, not thousands, but dozens, in a couple 100-year period, claimed to be Messiah, or had people claim they were Messiah. They weren't killed on the spot. They weren't stoned. They weren't crucified by, or tried to be, by other Jews, because it's not illegal to claim to be a Messiah. So remember, if that sounds surprising to you, remember, to an ancient person, Messiah did not equal divinity. Some might have had that view, but in general, when they heard Messiah, they thought human king ordained by God to be king. So to be Messiah does not mean he thinks he's divinity. Had Jesus stopped there, that might have helped him. He might have been okay. But it's the next thing he said that got him in a lot of trouble. And that was, you will see the Son of Man seated. Now, who's the Son of Man figure? Well, the Son of Man figure comes from Daniel 7, 13 to 14. In Daniel 7, there's a vision of all the different empires of the time. And it says, one like a son of man. And you read this, Daniel 7, 13 to 14. One like a son of man comes before the Ancient of Days, that's God the Father, coming with the clouds. And when he goes there, God the Father gives him full authority to rule over all the peoples of earth, and they serve him. They serve him. So Jesus, who uses the Son of Man terminology a lot in his ministry, he sees himself as that kind of Messiah, this Son of Man figure. The problem is, the Son of Man figure is someone like a divine figure because he rules over the nations like God the Father does. That's what gets him in trouble. That's what gets him in trouble. Let me say one quick word, another word about the Son of Man. Coming with the clouds is a metaphorical way of saying coming into the divine presence. Coming into the divine presence. Like in 1 Kings 8, 10 to 11. To being in the divine presence, like saying being on the clouds. It doesn't mean, this is not referencing Jesus coming through mass of liquid droplets through the atmosphere In other words, this is not about Jesus' second coming. It's not about him being up there in the atmosphere coming down. It's a metaphor to describe being in the divine presence. So when he says coming with the clouds of heaven, he is not referencing the end of time. He's referencing this Son of Man reference in Daniel 7. And in Daniel 7, it's not the end of time either. It's about the Son of Man figure who is given authority to rule over. So, authority and rule to rule over all the nations, kingdoms which serve him. Now, why did this make them so mad? Why is this blasphemy? Blasphemy can mean a few different things in ancient Judaism. When blasphemy is used of other humans, as the humans are the object, it means something like slander. That is, make false accusations damaging someone's character. That's what it means to slander them. It's like calling someone who lives in Houston a Cowboys fan. You just don't ever want to do this. You're just slandering them, right? It just ruins their character. Just teasing. All you Cowboys fans, bless your heart. If you're a Texan fan, right? So you slander, that's saying something bad. And that kind of slander, that kind of blasphemy is used all through the New Testament. In your translations, it probably says slander instead of the word blaspheme. Because today in American English, blasphemy is now taken its own special role, spiritual role, and that's the other way blasphemy is used, and that is toward God. But technically, it can be towards people or towards God. When it's toward God, it can mean something like slander or profane. And if you look at texts like in Leviticus 22, Exodus 27, Leviticus 22:32, and Exodus 20, verse 7, of not profaning the name of God, that's the idea that we don't want to speak the name of God and to profane it from the Ten Commandments. But here, Jesus seems to be the blaspheming God in their mind because he's a creature, and so he's claiming some kind of divine authority. So that is, Jesus is being accused of profaning the name or the character of Yahweh by assuming that Jesus, a mere mortal to them, holds divine authority to rule forever. So to them, in their view, Jesus, who's just a dude, is just a guy, is claiming divine authority like the Ancient of Days, God the Father, has. And that is exactly what's considered blasphemy. So when Jesus says what he says, it's like saying, I am the Messiah. He says, are you the Messiah? Jesus answers like this, I am the Messiah in the role of the Son of Man. Figure mentioned in Daniel 7, 13, 14. This means that once I enter into the presence of the Father, once I enter into the presence of the Father in the clouds of heaven, I will be vindicated, and I will rule over everyone forever. Of course, which includes all of you in this trial. So this is a reference to vindication. It's a reference to having divine authority to rule over them. And that's like saying, this Jewish council is not the authority. I will rule over you. And they respond by taking him to Pilate. So that's enough for them to say Jesus in Judaism deserves to die. But now this is very debated of whether or not they have authority to kill him or not. Probably they want to send him on to Pilate because Jesus does have a following. And if word got out that they stoned him and so forth, there'd be a massive uprising. But if Pilate did it, then the Romans can squash what needs to be squashed. So they take him to Pilate. When they take him to Pilate, Pontius Pilate was the 5th prefect of Judea, of the Roman province of Judea. Now, a prefect is something kind of like a governor. Pilate's chief responsibility in Jerusalem would have been like a governor. He would have overseen the military, and he would have collected imperial taxes. Now, Pilate wouldn't care at all about religious designations. He doesn't care if people, he claims to be the Messiah. He's like, whatever, this is ridiculous. But when they say he claims to be king of Jews, well, that's them's fighting words, because Pilate is the king of the Jews in the time. I mean, Herod is the great king, but Pilate is the local ruler. And so political claims are what gives a lot of problem. So the Romans were very concerned, and they always won in their time, with fighting off people they considered to be terrorists. And that's exactly that the religious leadership is trying to get Jesus, in the eyes of the Romans, to be seen as a terrorist. So they bring him to Pilate. Of course, Pilate's like, he doesn't seem like a bad guy to me because, I mean, look, I interview him. Are you the king of the Jews or not? Well, they say, you say so. Well, are you or not? Well, you say so. Verse 5, Jesus he continually makes no further answer. Pilate just wondered, like, what in the world? He doesn't have any problem with him. And then we go on a little bit farther. And he says, well, maybe I can release to you the Barabbas or the king of the Jews. Which one do you want? So we have time after time where Jesus could have escaped. Remember, way back in the prayer in Gethsemane,
Jesus asked the Father, is there another way I can be released? I want this cup to be released from me. So in the text, we have these suspenseful moments. Well, they can't have, in the fake Sanhedrin trial, they don't agree together. But then, he asks this question, he gets in trouble. When he goes in front of Pilate, and Pilate's like, he's not answering, he just seemed innocent to me. Well, then that still doesn't work. What about, I'll give you King of the Jews of Barabbas. Here's another chance where God the Father might say, you don't have to go to the cross. Didn't happen. They said, give us Barabbas. Now, Barabbas is an Aramaic word, two Aramaic words. Bar Abbas means son of the Father. Bar Abbas. So there's irony there. And so the Israelites, the Jews, are saying, give us Barabbas, means give us the son of the Father. Well, of course, we know that Jesus is technically the Father's son. Not technically as if that's his daddy, but he is God's son as an office, as a title. So they get the wrong God's son. Barabbas they leave Jesus. They take the wrong Son of God, as it were. Once they demand that, in verse 15, Pilate, wishing to satisfy the mob, released them to Barabbas, having scourged Jesus, he delivered him to be crucified. Once Jesus was considered a condemned criminal, he was treated just like one. They would have taken flagellum, almost certainly, these leather strips with bone and stuff on the inside of it, and they would have whipped his flesh so much that it would have pulled the skin off. Sometimes that was the only punishment by Romans, that they beat him so badly and they would have bled so much, that was the only punishment. Here we learn he did that and he got crucified. They take him, as they go along, they start making fun of him. They throw purple on him. They're sarcastic. Verse 18, they say, "Hail, King of the Jews!" They strike him on the head. They spit on him. They kneel down like to pay homage. They're presenting Jesus like a prince. That's what you do to a prince. You give him purple. You don't beat him up, but you give him purple. You give him a staff. Here they give him a staff. They beat him in the head with it. They give him a crown. Now, it's likely the crown of thorns was to face outward, not inwards. I mean, some things probably hurt him, but the idea is that almost certainly the crown's on the outside because it was an evil mimic, an evil copy of an actual diadem crown or Stephanos crown that the emperor could wear. They would wear it around their head, and it looked like the Olympian, that's called a Stephanos crown, a victor's crown, like leaves, and they dipped it in gold. So the thorn is supposed to be an evil mimic of that. They take him, they put purple clothes on him and so forth. Now in verse 21, they find this guy named Simon of Cyrene and said, "Hey, take this." They probably gave to Simon. Jesus probably didn't carry the whole cross. I know that works in church plays and whatnot. He probably almost certainly did not carry the whole cross. He probably carried the beam where his hands were. And Simon comes in and helps him because Jesus is beaten and bleeding so badly he's too weak to carry it. He goes to a place called Golgotha. Golgotha means the place of the skull in verse 22. We don't know where Golgotha is. There's a traditional spot that you can go there right now, and there's a pretty garden and the whole bit. That place is almost certainly not the spot, and I'll explain to you if you want to ask me privately why not. There's another traditional spot. There's a church on top, and it's probably where that is. So the spot that most people go to today and get their pretty pictures is probably not the right spot, but we're not exactly sure what it is. Golgotha almost certainly would have been on a road or near a road and outside of Jerusalem because it's like a big billboard. It's like a big billboard where people who walk by see this is what happens when you cross Rome. That was the purpose of that. Romans rarely crucified Romans, but they liked to crucify non-Romans. And that was it was considered the most painful and shameful torture available. Victims died naked, bleeding, struggling to breathe. It's debated how they died. Either they bled to death or they asphyxiated. That is, their inner guts and so forth just sank down so much they couldn't catch their breath and they died. And it could take several days. Usually when they died, they were not put in a tomb. Animals came and ate their carcass off the cross. We know for a fact that Jesus had a titulus. We get the word title from it. A titulus is a piece of wood. A lot of times it was hung around their neck as they walked. And in verse 26 it says, the inscription says, "The King of the Jews." Jesus probably had the titulus around his neck, and they put it above him, probably above him, his head. And the titulus had the charge for why he was crucified. So he could be condemned for many different crimes, but what got him crucified was whatever the charge was. And all four Gospels agree he was charged with high treason. And that was to claim to be the king of the Jews. By the way, crosses had different shapes in the ancient world. Some were X's, and some were capital T, and some were lowercase t. And most scholars think that it was either a lowercase t or a capital T because he does have a titulus that says King of the Jews. We don't know exactly where they placed it, but it probably was above him. So an X like this, and there's no place to put it. So it probably was one of these, and it probably was right above his head. It probably was not 30 feet in the sky. It's probably a big post standing in the ground that might have been 6 to 10 feet in the air, maybe, enough to he can get up there, and then they attach it. It probably had a big hook, and they attach the wood on top of it. And he's crucified next to other terrorists, other bandits, it says, and then he died. He died around 3 p.m. on Friday. We actually can date this date almost certainly. It's almost certainly April 7th, AD 30. Friday, April 7th, AD 30. It says there was darkness at his death, which signified probably judgment over the people. In the prophets, oftentimes darkness over the land was considered God's judgment over the people. I'll wrap up on this. Jesus had prayed that the Father had another way. Remember in 1436 that there's another cup to be passed from him. And so many events led us to believe that Jesus might be spared, like I said. Witnesses don't agree. Pilate doesn't oppose Jesus. Jesus could have been released. And in the very, very end, even Elijah maybe come. However, it's not to the very end of Jesus' life that we discovered God the Father never answered his prayer request in the positive. The very last thing Jesus says in Mark's Gospel is not a cry of victory. He says in verse 34, Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthani. In Aramaic means, my God, why have you forsaken me? That expression means something like, my God, why have you not rescued me? He's quoting Psalm 22:1. Now, I'm convinced he's not meaning to invoke the end of Psalm 22, which talks about God's vindication, because he didn't quote the end of the psalm, and there's other reasons, but I'm out of time. Instead, he quotes the first part of God, why haven't you rescued me? Why have you abandoned me? Let me say a couple words about this, and then I'm finished. This is not when Jesus bore the sins of the world. Why? Because Jesus is not dead here. In Christian theology, the idea is that when Jesus died, he took upon the sins of the world. Not in Mark, but in other parts of the New Testament. Here he's not dead. He's still talking and alive. And so this is not a feeling of separation as if he didn't know where the Father went, and now he's the Son all by himself. It's rather like saying one more time, God, why haven't you rescued me? So we don't know if he's feeling that where did the Father go, but he's not been rescued. This is a powerful fact. This is a powerful, powerful fact. It means that even though Jesus continually held out hope to be spared his death to the bitter end, it also means he continually denied himself and submitted his will to the Father. What an example for us.
Thank you so much for listening to today's Glimpse of the Kingdom. If you want more theological reflections, go to davidpendergrass.com. If you want me to come out to your church or to help your organization with consulting, go to davidpendergrassconsulting.com.